Tyrone Hayes, he basically he developed this endocrine screening program. He patented a specific way to test the hormonal systems of frogs. Syngenta saw that, they caught wind of it, and they're like, okay, well, can you help us? We have this endocrine disrupting screening program, this financial conduit called EcoRisk, and we want you to join the EcoRisk panel to look into the endocrine disrupting effects of atrazine. So he joined it, and he still worked in his laboratory, and they gave him funding. And when he found effects, he found adverse effects at low doses, and he found reduced larynxes in African clod frogs, and he found that some of them were turning into hermaphrodites. So he reported that to Syngenta, to the EcoRisk panel, and he said after that they started to kind of sit on the data, and they didn't want him to inform the EPA or publish. He was under embargo. In order to actually publish or even go public with it, the EPA had to intervene and pressure Syngenta to end his embargo, right? So he publishes 2 studies, and then based off of his studies and other studies that showed similar effects, this environmental group called the NRDC got involved, and they had court proceedings with Syngenta. So pretty much they pressured through court Syngenta to, the EPA. Excuse me, it wasn't with Syngenta, it was with the EPA, their court proceedings. So they pressured the EPA to form a risk assessment to look into it because atrazine was up for re-registration, right? And through that process, the first time in 2003, pretty much the EPA looked at a bunch of studies, and they said that, okay, so there's possible adverse effects to atrazine. That was their statement, but more studies need to be done. And then what they decided to do, the EPA and Syngenta, is they collaborated, and it wasn't really a collaboration, I don't think. And a lot of people will say the same thing. I can, even people on the scientific advisory panel, the independent scientists, it was just would say something very similar to what I'm saying here. It was pretty much left up to Syngenta to, create these testing protocols based off of the EPA and the scientific advisory panel's recommendation, and then to hand them into the EPA. So Syngenta, what they did is, I explained in my video, there was one lobbyist that got involved, Jim Tozy, who said, well, you guys don't have proper testing methods, told the EPA that, and there's not enough studies that show that there's these effects that you're saying, right? So basically, there was these good laboratory practices set up, these protocols. So any study that the EPA looked at to form their conclusion had to be quantitative based off of the protocols that Syngenta pretty much made and handed in. And every single study in the open literature had, for example, they used static renewal system. And the Syngenta-funded study was pretty much the only one to use glass container apparatus.
Wow.
And so just that one thing changed the study from quantitative to qualitative, and therefore the EPA couldn't use it to determine whether or not to make their determination. So in 2007, what happened is, based off of a single Syngenta-funded study, the EPA said that there's no adverse effects to amphibians. And since then, that is their last official statement. But in 2008, again, the scientific advisory panel said, well, you guys can't say it based off of this one study, so there's more testing. Since then, there's been more testing. The EPA has released drafts of their risk assessment, like in 2016, where they actually included 55 studies this time, right? They've released drafts basically saying that, yeah, there's possible risks to reproduction and a whole host of other issues. It's not just the reproduction. That's just like one thing.
And have y'all talked about what atrazine is? It's like a really common herbicide, right? Or pesticide?
Yeah.
And
you did mention it. And it's almost like moral of the story is Alex Jones was right. They're turning the frogs.
Amish, wrong. Okay, so where Alex Jones comes in Where Alex Jones comes in, if I understand right, is he started citing these studies and saying, hey, they're turning the frogs gay. They're turning the freaking frogs gay. And it was like kind of this half-truth where actually Tyrone Hayes was saying something else. He was saying the frogs were turning into hermaphroditic. They were...
so, yeah, it feminized frogs.
Feminized frogs.
Yeah.
But I think this is sort of a story about industry-funded research, though, really. I mean, it's not really about the gay frogs. It's about basically this industry who wants to protect their cash cow, like pesticide, coming in and they don't like what this guy's finding. And so they basically are trying to discredit him, all these things. Now, it's kind of interesting because I was thinking about this. I was like, what do you compare this to? On the one hand, because I'm not going to totally agree or disagree here, because I think there are people who sort of disagree with Tyrone Hayes. There's people who think he's been shut down. There are people that think Tyrone Hayes is basically crazy, right? But
thinks that?
Hold on, Amish. Hold on.
Yeah,
Let me say this. It seems like there's two kind of analogies you can make. You could say this is sort of like the tobacco industry when people were finding out that tobacco causes cancer. And then the tobacco industry comes in and they try to discredit all those people and they say, hey, what are you talking about? It doesn't have any adverse effects. And it's a story we've heard before where an industry comes in, they're trying to protect their own ego and their own product, and they end up ginning up a bunch of fake science to support it, right? The other way you can look at it is that it's kind of like the anti-vax movement, right? Some people would say that the anti-vax movement is a bunch of fear-mongerers, all this kind of stuff. The anti-vax people say, no, we're following the science. You guys are the fake ones. The industry people are saying, no, you guys are actually causing harm with what you're doing. Now, I think with that, we should talk about like the other side of the story. So Surginta's saying Tyrone Hayes is basically wrong about this, and you're saying, no, Surginta's doing this hit job on Tyrone Hayes' research by making these lab practices that are impossible for any lab without like super big funding to fulfill. Is that right?
Well, okay, so I would, first of all, I would say that, of course, with science, you're always going to want more data, right? So it's really difficult to just be like Tyrone Hayes is right, but that's what I think is that they clearly went out of their way, and you could to silence and discredit him, and to avoid their products being regulated, and that yes, the EPA and other product defense industry front groups and PR companies aided Syngenta in keeping atrazine on the market. Now, when it comes down to the science, I would say that there seems to be a debate that it's not an endocrine disruptor, but overwhelmingly, I mean, anybody can look it up themselves. Overwhelmingly, there are these effects that are noticed. And if you look at the Syngenta funded study findings, like, I mean, they are hammering these frogs up to doses of like 100 micrograms per liter, and they're finding virtually no adverse effects whatsoever, which is completely anomalous.
Syngenta is. They're saying, oh, we can give them any amount of this
pretty much,
atrazine.
yeah.
Classic. Everyone just wants to do. We want to do our own study. Like all these corporations, and it's almost like this guy needs his own Aaron Brockovich movie, because it reminds me of that. Like he needs that thing to bring awareness on this issue, because it's like a complicated place and it's hard to fight back against billions of dollars of science from like a corporation.
Well, I think that like the most common response, and it's probably the response every industry will always take this response. Like, I mean, they will always take this route, right? So, like I said, there's a whole industry, a product defense industry, set up to aid corporations, and they use the tobacco playbook, right? And they do try and like fuck with people. Like the shit that Tyrone Hayes was saying sounds crazy. Like they were coming to you and say, we're going to lynch you and we're going to rape your wife. But I mean, this is the kind of stuff that people are literally paid to do, to intimidate and really just scare people into silence. And it's I just think this is certainly a thing that's been shown time and time again, that this is the response. I mean, you look at Teflon, or you look at the NFL concussion guy. I forgot his name right now, but the way that they go after these scientists who find that there's these problems, well, they don't fight with science; they fight with PR, intimidation.
Oh yeah, dude.
And yeah.
Yo, Steven, I was telling this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and that's why I think probably you're so passionate, is because you're seeing this scientist who, by all accounts, is a good scientist. I've listened to your interview with him. He's so sharp. He's
legendary.
He's
man.
a brilliant guy.
His story is legendary, and his fashion.
And it's like, I do see your sense of sort of like an injustice has been done to this guy, and that may be why there's a beef stirring, a gay frog beef that I want to get into.
Yeah, this is
just let me explain something real quick here. Like, so
yes.
I spent like 4 months. I know in the beginning of my video I say 3 months, but that's because I edited it and then I spent that intro, and then I spent another month working on the video.
Such a good video.
It was 4 months of research where I vacillated between thinking this guy is crazy, I can't trust him, let me talk to other scientists, let me find out their opinion on him, let me look through what's in the open literature, let me look at the way that the regulatory agencies dealt with this. And it was the conclusion that I have now is that yes, what this guy was saying about the way that they tried to interfere with his science is right. And yeah, so, but there was definitely times where I would look at this guy and just think, okay, maybe this guy's out to lunch, maybe he's just bullshit.
That's what makes this such a compelling story, though, is that there is that element of doubt. If there was this sense of, oh, we know exactly what happened here, in some ways the story wouldn't be as compelling. What is compelling is that Tyrone Hayes, he's a character. I mean, he's not, you get into his past, you get into some of the emails he sent. It is kind of wild. I think anyone could admit that. But that has been used to completely discredit him and say nothing he says is true. But you listen to him, he's when he's talking the science, he's pretty credible to me at least.
Well, he's definitely credible. And if you think about it, you can look at the anti-vax guy. Well, that guy, I mean, his whole reputation is destroyed. Like his paper was pulled. Tyrone Hayes' paper has been in PNAS since 2003. It's very well, like there's so many citations for that paper. It stays there. You would think it would be retracted by now. Not only that, he continues to publish his research.
He is a genius.
And so I just, even comparing it, I don't think there's a comparison between him and the anti-vax guy. I think that's just nonsense. And with this guy, he's a legitimate scientist.
Yeah, he's a prodigy in the field, if anything. He almost comes across like a Miyazaki character. He's like a good, wholesome person who has a natural calling, and he does it perfectly. Like his come up story, and we'll get to Miles Powell in a second, but like when I saw it in the Miles Powell video, his come up story is like, this guy's a legend. He's magical. Like he's just out there in the swamps because he loves it. He loves the game of studying these frogs.
I got to also say something. Like, I want everybody to just disconnect his personality from this story and just look at the facts of what happened. Let's not even look at it like a story. Let's look at it like on a factual basis, right? That's how we have to approach it. And when I saw Miles Powell's video the first time, I thought there's something up with this. Like there's this guy, he's speaking so confidently.
Yeah.
But what he's saying is the exact same thing that I'm reading in these PR shill articles. Well, by people who are openly have conflicts of interest with agrochemical companies. I'm seeing Miles Power and I'm watching his series and I see him verbatim read like a piece of like a PR paragraph talking about how there's 7,000 studies into atrazine, and those studies I couldn't find them at all. So I guess they're Syngenta's own internal studies, but Syngenta's being like, 7,000 studies have proven that atrazine is safe. And Miles Power just reads that straight from the website.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's wild, eh?